This is just a talk about a library I've been working on. It's a bit of an experiment. It's called Raxx. It's an Elixir Webserver interface. And well, it's based on Raxx. Raxx is a Ruby web server interface. For anyone not from Ruby, there are others, but I don't know the names of them. So sorry. There's a couple of key differences with Raxx. The main one being it has 2 X's, which is a pattern in Elixir libraries. So I just want to tell you a bit about what I've been doing with this. But first, there is definitely an elephant in the room. So plug. Yeah, it's basically the same as plug. I was going to come up with more reasons about why I did this, but I think Johnny's given me a good excuse there. I was exploring. I was really just seeing what I could do and trying to learn some more about sort of the web stack. To go a bit further in it, my motivation is, in fact, this line. So the plug con object has an owning PID associated with it. And it needs this to do like send chunk responses and a few other things. So I saw this, and it allows for a lot of sort of impure functions to be done. And I hear good things about purity and reducing side effects in functional languages. So I wanted to see if I could sort of eliminate this, this calling out as the process that was running the TCP. I've said this a couple of times, but I quite often read Haskell and write Elixir. This is basically my way to thrash all the OO history out of me, because I've got a Ruby background, so it was a serious job. So the principle being, stateless HTTP request response model, it fulfills a valuable role in modern applications, and it will continue to be the case. So I think plug adds some complexity when you're just doing a request response pattern. So simple HTTP looks like this. You get a request, your application turns it into a response. A simple Raxx application does the same. So what we have here is, well, you get a request, you get an environment, there's just dependencies that you need to pass, configuration, and then you return a response. So this looks very similar to plug. The main difference being that we don't have to pass the request when we make the response. So the response object can be created like anew every time, and the request is lost. The request object itself is just a map. So there's a lot of information about the request, key ones being essentially method and path. Those are the ones you use most. And so the reason that I've sort of, with playing with this library, I quite liked where it showed up is I don't need a DSL for routing. There's so much power in the Elixir pattern matching that I think this is really quite a nice router. But there's nothing but a function call in Elixir here. So because the object I path in is reasonably expressive in what it has, the one piece of help it does for you is it splits paths on every slash, so you get a list of segments for every URL. You can have well, just, I think, a very readable controller, and there's no magic. So for people who like minimal things, if you want to dig into this about what's going on, there's really nothing to get lost in. So this is how you divide up your actions based on the request. The response is even simpler. It has a status, headers, and a body. This is exactly the same as the Ruby Raxx thing. I think others do the same. There is actually a fourth field. There's a sneaky errors field, so if your root throws an error, we can catch that, throw a nice 500, and then re-raise the error so the process dies properly. But you should imagine that's not there. Otherwise, it leads you to doing all sorts of weird control flow with errors and throws, which is not what I would try to do with a nice functionally pure app. So here's now a controller with a bunch of responses. Sort of try and look at this one. So in the top one, we just return the map directly. So the status is 200, and the body is the string. There's, again, absolutely no magic here. In the ones below, I just use some of the helper functions. So you can have, again, very readable things where response.created, it just makes a map, and it puts in the correct 201 field, so you don't have to remember the codes if you're better at remembering the names. But I think most people actually are better at remembering the codes. I quite like this example. So there was a talk about splitting things into umbrella apps for controllers. I think this is a brilliant way of doing things. So in this case, the myapp.createUser would be a separate umbrella app. I think this is exactly the line that your sort of domains should be split upon. So your responsibilities, that's the one. So yeah, responsibilities between handling HTTP and the domain logic. I was going to say something else about that one, but well, you have to ask me after, because I've completely forgotten. So there's, yep, so that's 5 minutes. So I can see when so yeah, so just the final part of this story was streaming. Essentially, I decided that I wanted request response as a first-class citizen, but that I did manage a way to do streaming with sort of separate, also pure callbacks, which make it look very much like a gen server. And I can't tell you about that, so I'll stop.